All right, Scott, take it away.
All right, Joe, thanks. Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. Hope everyone's doing great and off to a good start in your year. We've got a treat for you tonight. We're so happy you could join us for this webinar on investing. Eventide is a group and a partner of Veritas. It's a Boston-based investment company, and they've got some very unique things that are exciting for us. We've been partnering with them for the last 4 or 5 years, and the concept is integrating your values into the investing world. And most people, when they invest, if you think about it, they, it's very simple. They say, no, what am I going to get out of it? But really, what we want to do is think just a slightly different, not only that, but how to make a positive impact in the world with the companies that we have invested in. Jason Meyer is with us tonight. He's a managing partner of Eventide, the Boston-based investment company. And in his day-to-day work, Jason serves as director of advocacy to all sorts of groups. He's an outstanding speaker. We're delighted to have him with us tonight. We're going to, after the presentation, allow hopefully for a few minutes of Q&A, and hope you enjoy yourself. So Jason, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the great introduction and for setting up tonight's call. So just want to say a warm hello to all of you who are joining in for a topic that I am really passionate about. It's the power that investing has to change the world. So I'm going to skip my background since Scott did such a nice job introducing me here. And then just a couple of disclosures. This is educational in nature. We're not going to pitch you on any products. This is intended to help you just think more about your investing and hopefully gain insight into some of the things that are possible when you invest. Okay, so how do we change the world? This is a very big and exciting topic. I wish we were in the same room together where I could hear your ideas and theories about how the world changes. Since we can't do that, I'm just going to offer a few thoughts here. So first, we have to start by basically dealing with some common misconceptions about how the world changes. So the world does not fundamentally change through, and this is going to be a controversial statement I'm going to make, politicians. So I don't know if this is a disappointment to you or an encouragement, but if you think about it, politicians, they typically have their finger up into the wind. They're trying to read which way the winds are blowing, and they operate more or less as a servant to the will of the people and the winds of society. They're really hired to enact ideas that have been in circulation for quite some time, and so they're often downstream of cultural change, and it's difficult for them to go against those winds. Additionally, the world does not change through individuals working in isolation. History remembers heroic individuals, so we can think about William Wilberforce or Nelson Mandela. But if you read the history closely, you'll know that there were many other forces at play. So the thoughts that I've just shared are not my own, but these are the thoughts of this person. This is James Davison Hunter. He's a sociologist from the University of Virginia. If you're interested in how the world changes, I recommend his book entitled To Change the World. So how does the world change? Well, let me read you a quote from his book. He says this capacity to change the world is not evenly distributed in a society, but it's concentrated in certain institutions. It's going to be the key word, institutions, and among certain leadership groups who have a lopsided access to the means of cultural production. Institutions. So think Hollywood, think Harvard University, think New York Times. These kind of elite institutions have a disproportionate effect on our world. And I'm going to argue that investing is one of these institutions that has a disproportionate shape on our world. And as you'll see, I'm going to make a historical case here. Capital and the movement of capital has shaped our world. So for my first example, we're going to talk about this person. And I have a couple of audience polls in here. I'll let the panelists vote on this as well. But this person on the screen, who is it? A very famous explorer. So if you go back to your middle school history days, Who's the photo of the person on the screen? Great, you guys are taking to this. Led one of the most famous voyages of all time. Leave this open for just a moment longer. Last call. All right, let's see how everyone did. Okay, so 86% of our audience said Christopher Columbus, and that is in fact the correct answer. So good job everyone in recalling information you thought you could forget. We all think we know the story about Christopher Columbus, right? He sailed the ocean blue in 1492. But what many of us don't know is the investing story behind the journey. So what Columbus was proposing to do was to access a trading route with India by sailing west off of Europe. He had done some calculations and he had figured that Japan was just 3,000 miles west off of Europe. He was obviously dead wrong about that, but nevertheless, that's what he thought. And he needed financing to go and to access this trading route. What he was proposing to do had never been done before. It was very expensive, and no one person had the capital to finance such an expedition. And so what he had to do was actually traipse all over Europe, seeking to drum up investor support for his journey. He started in his home country of Italy. He was from Genoa, Italy, and they turned him down. Next, he went to Portugal, which was the world leader in these kinds of shipping expeditions, and they said no. He goes to France, no. He goes to England, no. He finally received his yes from Spanish investors. And many of us remember the story of Ferdinand and Isabella. By the way, he struck a very sophisticated deal. He negotiated the right to receive 10% revenue from this trading route and an option to invest up to 1/8 in any business that would be established in lands that he would claim for Spain. Pretty interesting. So make no mistake about it, this was definitely a for-profit business funded by investors. Now we know how the rest of the story goes, but what I want us to key in on is the world change. I want to ask you a series of questions. Why does Central America speak Spanish? Why is the major religion of that whole territory Roman Catholic? Why do they eat tortillas instead of, for example, croissants? The answers to these questions is actually investors. Because Spain backed Columbus, he sailed under the Spanish flag, and he carried with him Spanish interests into the new territory. He was from Italy, but it wasn't the Italian influence, it was actually the Spanish investors. So Spain, of course, speaks Spanish. Their major religion is Roman Catholic. They eat tortillas. That explains what happened in Central America. It was actually investors who changed the world here. Let me give you another example. This is the map of the British India Company, shown in the red color, and the Dutch East India Company, shown in the yellow color. They were established in 1600 and 1602. These were shipping companies, just like what Columbus was doing. They were accessing India for things like spices and silk. Economic historians will tell you that these are the first two truly modern corporations as you and I think about them today. What made them modern? Well, they were very expensive, and they raised the capital that they needed for their businesses by issuing stocks and bonds. This was the first time that this was done. They issued stocks and bonds to ordinary investors. In fact, we get the world's first stock exchange in Amsterdam, where people could then trade these stocks and bonds with other investors in order to gain liquidity from their investment. The world of investing was really born out of these shipping companies in the 1600s. Did these two companies change the world? You better believe it. In the case of the British India Company, India actually becomes a colony of Britain as a result of this one company. This is why, to this day, although it's not well known, the official language of India is, drum roll, English. They actually have the second largest English-speaking population in the world. And if you count those who speak English as a second language, it's actually number one in the world in terms of the English-speaking population. All of that came from the British India Company and investors. And if you know anything about Indian history, from the railroad to the university to its political structures, all of that came from British investors. What about the Dutch East India Company? Well, established in 1602, by the year 1634, they had achieved a company value of 8.2 trillion with a T in today's dollars, making it far and away the most expensive company to have ever existed. In fact, dwarfing companies like Google today. And accordingly, they had a massive impact all over Southeast Asia. It was investors who changed the world. Now, these investors were probably not thinking about changing the world, right? They were thinking about getting a return. Nevertheless, the companies that they were investing in were changing the world. So the world of investing is often running in the 1600s, and it should not surprise us that abuse soon followed. And one of the people that would speak into this is actually someone you probably recognize, Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe. He wrote about many contemporary issues in his day, including investing. Here's what he had to say. Investing has raised the fancies of credulous people to such a height that merely on the shadow of expectation, they formed companies, chose committees, appointed officers, shares, books, raised great stocks, and cried up an empty notion to that degree that people have been betrayed to part with their money for shares in a new nothing. And when the inventors have carried on the jest till they've sold all their own interest, they leave the cloud to vanish of itself, and the poor purchasers to quarrel with one another, to go to law about settlements, transferrings, some bone or other thrown among them by the subtlety of the author, to lay blame of the miscarriage upon themselves. Thus the shares at first began to fall by degrees, and happy is he who sells in time, till like brass money, it will go at last for nothing at all. Couple of comments. First, I'm glad we don't talk this way anymore. This is incredibly convoluted language. But second, you can see how frothy the world of investing was. People were investing money in anything, right? Trying to get rich. And businesses were wise to this. And so they were quickly rushing to market, really to just take the money of poor investors. And it was a house of cards ready to fall. And so what was needed in this day was for someone to bring a level head and a sensitive conscience to the practice of investing. And the person that would do this is a person named John Wesley. John Wesley was an English minister in the 17th century. You may recognize his name. He actually founded what's called the Methodist movement within Christianity. There's also a branch of the church called the Wesleyans that are named after him. This is probably his most famous quote. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. Isn't that beautiful? This is one of those quotes to mark down and to save. Well, John Wesley talked about investing in a famous sermon in the year 1759 entitled The Use of Money. I call it famous because this sermon is credited as the starting place of what now today we refer to as values-based investing or socially responsible investing. It actually goes back to this date. And I've got a longer quote here. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'm just going to pull out a couple of excerpts. You can go back and review the recording if you're interested in reading the full thing. He said this, "We are thirdly to gain all we can without hurting our neighbor." So he was not opposed to making money. He says, hey, gain all you can, but do it without hurting your neighbor. He says, this we cannot do if we love our neighbor as ourselves. We cannot, if we love everyone as ourselves, hurt anyone in his substance. And then he traces out some of the specifics for his day in the world of business and investing. I'm going to skip ahead to the last part of the quote here, where he lays out his thesis. He says this, if the profits we earn in investing profit the souls of men, hey, you're clear. Your employment is good. Your gain is innocent. But if those profits are coming from activities that are either sinful in themselves, remember he was a Christian minister, or natural inlets to sin of various kinds, then it is to be feared. You have a sad account to make. Oh, beware, lest God say in that day, these have perished in their iniquity, but their blood do I require at thy hands. Wow, right? Very strong language. This definitely raises the stakes if we think about our investing. It's not just about a return, is it? The return is being funded by business activities. And his question is, are the businesses we're investing in helping our neighbor or hurting our neighbor? He framed it as a way of impacting the world. If we skip ahead to the present day and just think about some well-known companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Netflix, hopefully you'll agree with me that these companies have shaped the world. They've changed the way that we access information, the way that we get our news, the way that we form our opinions, the way that we spend our leisure time. And guess what? All of them were funded by investors. In fact, these companies would not exist without investors. First, venture capital investors, then in the initial public offering to the public markets, pushed higher in secondary markets. How many of us are thinking about what's happening behind the scenes? Let me give you one other example from history that I think is just an incredible example of changing the world in a positive way through intentional investing. So if we roll back to the year 1971, not that long ago for some of us, Christians, as well as many others, were very concerned about apartheid. Now, for those of you who may be fuzzy on the history here, the word apartheid comes from a language in South Africa, from the Afrikaans, and the word means separation. You can actually translate it literally as aparthood, or to keep separate. And it was a word that was used to describe a racial segregation that existed in South Africa in that day, where the local Black population was kept separate from the white population. And besides being kept separate, they were also treated in an inferior manner. And so Christians, as well as many others, were very concerned about this in the early 70s. And the South African government was ignoring multiple United Nations sanctions and embargoes. They basically were saying, who cares? Leave us alone. So let's say you're alive at this time, you care about this issue. The powers that be are powerless. What do? Well, it was actually a group of Episcopal investors who took up the power of investing to change the world. So what they did is they realized that in their investment accounts, they were shareholders of General Motors, the automotive company. And General Motors had operations in South Africa. And so they said, what if we as shareholders write a letter to General Motors and ask them to change their ways? This was actually the first example of modern shareholder advocacy. So to do this, they enlisted the help of this man. This is Leon Sullivan. You can see he was a Black man. He was a Baptist minister and an anti-apartheid activist. So he grew up under Jim Crow in the US and had experienced discrimination firsthand because of the color of his skin, carried that burden with him in life. And when he heard about the plight of the Black population in South Africa and apartheid, he became a very concerned person and an activist. So he worked with these Episcopals, and they came up with what are called the Sullivan Principles, which are named after Leon Sullivan. And they're a set of principles that they proposed to GM. It was things like equal pay for equal work, same working conditions for Blacks and whites, integrating the bathrooms and the water fountains, which were segregated, things like that. They formally proposed this to General Motors via a shareholder resolution, and General Motors says, we'll do it. Amazingly, they actually brought Leon Sullivan onto the board of General Motors to oversee the whole thing. Then guess what happens? Ford and Goodyear, two other automotive companies with operations in South Africa, they said, we'll do it too. And one by one, like dominoes, companies begin to adopt these principles. And then the culture begins to change. As a matter of fact, history remembers that one of the key instruments in the fall of apartheid, if not the most decisive, was actually this investor pressure. Pretty amazing. And by the way, they had a 0.006% ownership stake in GM. This was not some huge institution. These were ordinary investors who changed the world through intentional action. Pretty cool. So how do we do this? I want to now jump to the present day. How do we put our values into practice in investing? Well, a couple of comments. Number one, we have to be intentional. Can't kid ourselves. This does not happen by accident. Number two, we have to work together. Any one of us with our individual IRA, we're a drop in the bucket. But if we work together, collectivizing our efforts, we gain more force. And finally, we need tools. We need investments that help us to put this intention and collaboration into action. That's what my company does. There are others. What do we mean by being intentional? Well, there's a few ways to be intentional. You can choose to avoid investing in companies that have some problem with them. So this is what John Wesley talked about, avoiding investing in companies that represent harm to our neighbor. We can choose to embrace companies for the good things that they're doing in the world. I'm going to talk more about this dimension. And finally, we can choose to engage companies directly. This is what the Episcopals did in the case of General Motors and apartheid that I've described. What I want to do now is I want to share with you 3 examples of what this can look like. These examples come from my own company, but this is just to get you thinking. The first example is in the area of clean energy. So check out these headlines recently from India. India's pollution today is as deadly as the black smog that covered Britain during the Industrial Revolution. New Delhi's gas chamber smog is so bad that United Airlines has decided to stop flying there. Look at this last one. Breathing in Delhi air is equivalent to smoking 44 cigarettes per day. I don't know if we have any world travelers on the call who have visited India, but if you've been to some of the major cities there, you will understand the meaning behind these headlines. I want to show you some images. These are all of smog. This is in New Delhi. This is in New Delhi as well. This is a famous arch called the India Gate. This is in Beijing, another place in the world where it's particularly bad. This is the same image left and right. On the left, a heavy rain has just come through and temporarily washed away the smog. On the right is what it looks like on a typical day. This is in Beijing as well. This is the Forbidden City, Beijing. Beijing. Here in the foreground, we see face masks. Boy, isn't that familiar. But here, there's no virus in the air. This photo was taken long before that. In places like India and China, it is actually common practice to wear a face mask when you go outside. Maybe you've seen people at the airport before coronavirus wearing face masks. You start when you're a child and you have every expectation of wearing a face mask outside for the rest of your life. Can you imagine? I'm so sick of wearing a mask. I can't imagine what it'd be like for this to be my lived reality for the rest of my life. This is also in Beijing. A lot of people don't realize this, but ordinary pollution accounts for 16% of all premature deaths worldwide. You can see that that's about 9 million lives lost, and it exceeds tobacco smoking. It also exceeds road accidents, all wars, murder, forms of interpersonal violence, and many other causes. This is the same data, but broken out by the type of pollution. We're talking about air, so that's blue. And it's organized by the wealth of countries, low income, lower middle, upper middle, and high income countries. So here we are in the US, right? We go outside, it's a beautiful day. We have some of the best air quality in the world. This is not a problem for us, but it's a major problem you can see in lower middle income countries, places like India and China that I showed you. The reason for that is they are right now in the middle of their industrial revolution, which is why they made the comparison to the black smog that covered Britain during the Industrial Revolution. The good news is that we have a way to address this. We can take the power of our natural resources, things like the sun, convert them to energy to power civilization without the pollution. I want to read you this quote, and I'm going to ask you who you think said this with another poll. So pay attention. "I put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. I wish I had more years left." Who do you think said this quote? Giving you some choices here. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, Saudi oil minister, Al Gore, the former vice president of the United States, Thomas Edison, the inventor, or Jim Robo, the CEO of NextEra Energy. What do you think? Good. Thanks for participating. Okay. Get your answers in. Last call. All right, let's see how we did. Okay, majority answer, Elon Musk, followed by Thomas Edison, and then Jim Robo. Let's see what the right answer is here. You might be surprised. Thomas Edison, 1931. Isn't that incredible? We tend to think it would be a modern speaker, someone like Elon Musk. But what we're able to do by harnessing the power of the sun has actually been a dream of inventors for a very long time. And coronavirus actually gave us a glimpse of what world change could look like. I showed you the India Gate earlier. Photo on the left is what we saw earlier, November 2019. The photo on the right was taken during the coronavirus economic slowdown. The air immediately cleared up, beautiful blue skies. In fact, there were many towns in India who said they could see the Himalaya mountains, and they did not even know that was possible from their town. I would much rather live in the world on the right. And this is what our investments can make possible. Let me share with you another one, incredible story, water technology. So more than 2,000 children die every single day due to water-related illness. This is a low estimate. So first, some definitions. These are the global standards in terms of what it means to have access to clean water. What that means is that there's a source of water within 1 kilometer of the home where you're able to obtain at least 20 liters for every member of your household. How much is 20 liters? Well, if you took a shower today and you are a typical American, you used 65 liters. Here we're talking about 20, and not just for showering, but you can see it includes all domestic purposes, including drinking, cooking, as well as personal hygiene. So quite a bit less than what we use here in the US, but this is the global standard. Now, to calibrate yourself to the problem of water, about 1 million people die each year from diarrhea. Obviously, most of those cases from contaminated water. And 80% are children under the age of 5. It's actually the second largest killer of children in the world, behind pneumonia. By the year 2025, how many people will not have access, given the definition we looked at? 800 million, huge number. 133 million people have what are called high-intensity worm infections in their gut. I'm going to talk about that. Half the schools of the world do not have access to clean water. But an investment in clean water, just $1, is estimated to have almost $26 in terms of increased productivity, because people aren't sick. They're not on the toilet. They're not in the healthcare system. The healthcare system experiences less burden, and so on. The world experiences a great reward from having clean water. This is the portfolio manager of my company, Finney Caravella, here with 3 of his boys in Uganda. He goes there every year for church reasons. While he's there, he conducts a deworming clinic. So he was a physician before an investor, and that's why these people are lined up. Basically, everyone in the region has this critter living in their gut. This is Bilharzia. It's a worm. Remember, I talked about those high-intensity worm infections. This is what I mean. People get worms from drinking contaminated water. It lays eggs in your blood. You then excrete it through your urine and feces. This contaminates the water, and the whole cycle perpetuates itself. Fortunately, it's very treatable, but not in any sort of a final way, because people will simply get it again unless they have clean water. In most of the world, water is considered women's work. Here's some women in Somalia getting water from a ditch, a woman in Mumbai or Bombay getting water from train tracks. And this is so important because girls often are forced to miss school because they're so preoccupied with the task of getting water for the family. So if you care about women's issues in the world, we have to address clean water. Parts of the world are reaching crisis levels. For example, in India, this is in Gujarat, where people line up for many hours a day to fetch even a small amount of water for their families. And huge demand faced by limited supply means fights break out. These are 2 women fighting in Pune over water. Here's a quote. "We face acute shortages of water, but water is available only 2 to 3 hours a day. Frequent fights. Need to walk 20 to 30 minutes to fetch water. It is so humiliating." As it turns out, the world actually has a lot of water. It's just hard to access. So most of it is locked up in the ocean where it's salt water. And if we look at the fresh water, most of that is locked up in glaciers and ice caps, and almost all the rest underground. So it's an access issue. And if we look at the world's available surface water, and we finally look at rivers and lakes, It's a vanishingly small amount of water. But this also means that if we can use infrastructure, technology, and investment to access, for example, groundwater, we could provide the world with clean water. So what we decided to do at my company is to invest in what we think is the leader in water technology, a leader in the developed world here in the US, but also a leader in the developing world. They have a stated 2025 goal to provide clean water to at least 20 million people living at the very bottom of the global economic pyramid, the poorest of the poor. This is a publicly traded company, pretty amazing. And this is matched by substantial volunteering, hundreds of thousands of hours on water projects, as well as straight donation, more than 25 million given away to water projects since the year 2010, making this, I think, just a really exciting example. All right, last one, unmet needs in healthcare in the area of the central nervous system. So last poll of the evening, what do you know about the disease schizophrenia? What do you know about the disease schizophrenia? I'm giving you 4 choices: multiple personalities, a set of symptoms, including delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and limited emotions, advanced bipolar, or delusional disorder. What do you think? Great, thank you. It's one of those things where you sort of know what it is until somebody asks you a question. All right, let's see how we did. This is pretty typical when I do these webinars. The results are all over the map. The leading answer here is that set of symptoms. We'll see what the right answer is. So the right answer is that set of symptoms. That's why it's hard to get your mind around, is because it's this collection of symptoms, and this artwork depicts them. There are what are known as positive symptoms. That doesn't mean good, that just means expressed. And negative symptoms, things that should be there, but that are absent. And as I go over these symptoms, I want you to be thinking, where have I encountered people who suffer from schizophrenia? So the hallmarks are delusions and hallucinations. People will see things, they'll hear things. People will talk about a lamppost talking to them, often very dark, the things that they see and hear. They'll have disorganized speech. It's hard to understand them. On the negative side, they have what's called a flat affect. So they lack the wide emotional range that you and I have. So if you tell a joke, they won't laugh. It's not necessarily because the joke isn't funny. They just lack that ability to respond. They'll have reduced speech and they lack initiative, just can't get motivated. Anybody come to mind? Where have you encountered people that suffer from schizophrenia? If your mind went to the homeless, you'd be correct. Schizophrenia is actually a vast problem among the homeless. In fact, it's one of the main drivers for homelessness in the first place. Affects a lot more people than we think. About 3 million Americans, which is about 1% of the population. The treatments we have are ancient, they barely work, and they have horrible side effects. The last approved treatment for schizophrenia was the year 1952. Ancient medicine, barely works, and many people say the cure is worse than the disease, because the drug will actually cause involuntary body contortions. So you'll twist and you'll writhe. Many people can't tolerate it. And so there's basically no recourse. And the World Health Organization ranks it as the 3rd most debilitating disease in the world. Hopefully you can appreciate what a big problem this is. If we could address this, wouldn't it be amazing? Potentially addressing even homelessness. Well, this is a space we've been watching very intently for a long time. We do a lot of healthcare investing at my company. And there hasn't been much, but a company did approach us with a new treatment that they were working on for schizophrenia. And so we were very interested, but also skeptical. But we brought them to the office, they laid out the case, they showed us the medical literature, talked about the mechanism of action. We took all that information in, put it through our gauntlet of tests, and at the end of the day, felt like it had real potential. So our investors were a part of this. We actually funded the clinical trial directly, And we were awaiting the results of the trial. And I want to share that with you. So they took a group of people who had schizophrenia. They divided them in half, 50-50. And then they randomized who got either a placebo, which is nothing, it's a blank pill, or the active drug, the drug they were developing. They admit all these patients to the hospital for 5 weeks, and then they monitor their symptoms. So here are the results. Baseline is day 0, up to 5 weeks in the hospital. That's on the x-axis. The vertical axis looks really scary, but it's actually very simple. If you see this PANSS, what that stands for is positive and negative symptom score. We know what those are. I showed those to you. So what you're looking for is to count up the number of symptoms that someone is expressing and the severity of those symptoms. And you want to see that improve for the drug over the stay. So the black line shows you what happened with the placebo. You can see it got a little bit better, which may be surprising, but it shouldn't be, because the disease is so debilitating. Just being in the hospital with regular physician care and meals, you get a little bit better. So this was expected. But in the blue, we can see what happened with the active drug. They got a more than 15-point reduction in this PANSS score, which clinicians told us is a complete game changer, changes the life of someone with schizophrenia. So this was huge. And then on top of this, the side effects appear to be very, very mild. And the way that you can tell is by looking at how many people are leaving the trial during that 5-week period. So 20% of the patients who were on the active drug discontinued, but 21% on the placebo. So no difference there. So whatever the side effects may be, they must be very tolerable. There's a phase 3 trial coming up, which will be required before this can be approved for the public use. And we're hoping for a good financial result. But think about what this story means. We could potentially meet a big need in the world. At my company, we call these ideas investing that makes the world rejoice. These are admittedly poetic. This is a poetic statement, but hopefully you can see there's real substance to this as well. Let me leave you with a final quote here. This is from the sociologist I opened up with. Most of us are inclined to what's been called the great man or great person view of history, that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. The only problem with this perspective is that it's mostly wrong. Against this great man view of history and culture, I would argue, along with many others, that the key actor in history is not the individual genius, but rather the network. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be sharing with you this evening is I have a personal desire to build a network, a coalition of investors who want to save for their financial future, but in ways that also make the world rejoice. So if this is of interest to you, I would encourage you to talk with your financial advisors at Veritas Strategies about how you can incorporate your values in the way that you invest. And with that, I'm going to welcome back on the team, and I think we can take some questions now.
All right, Jason, thanks so much for running through a big topic in a very succinct way. In terms of going through the questions and answers right now, for those of you that are joining us tonight, we encourage you to go down to the bottom of your screen and you'll see an icon that says Q&A with some speech bubbles above it. If you'd be so kind as to click on that and be able to type in any questions you might have for Jason or the team, that would be super. We're going to take the next 15 to 20 minutes to do so. So go ahead and gather some of your thoughts or comments and feel free to type them in.
Jason, I'll ask the first question here while other people are gaining their sea legs and figuring out the Q&A box. I guess the most obvious thing that I would have in mind, and that some people have asked me about this, is it sounds terrific, it's fabulous, makes you feel good, but how much return would I have to give up economically as versus my other traditional investment portfolio approaches?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Sometimes you hear stories like the ones I shared, and it sounds more like philanthropy than investing. And people, I think, by and large, are motivated to do good, but when they're investing so that they can grow their money, which is a need that they have. And so while they appreciate the point, they have concerns because they're not here really to take a concession on the returns in order to do good. And so the opportunity would be to try to combine the financial performance with the impact on the world. And the good news here is I don't think that you have to give anything up in order to integrate your values. There's a lot of research on this, which I of course didn't share, that show that integrating your values doesn't cost you much by way of return, if at all. And you could, for example, look at our own track record as an example of this. We're not investing with a purpose of accepting a lower return in order to do good. We're trying to bring those two together. And so the way that I describe it to people is we're looking for companies that are poised to grow by meeting important needs that exist in the world. So I gave you the impact side of each of the companies that I shared, but I could have just as easily given you the financial reasoning behind each of those investments. And so we're really trying to bring together the best, basically, investment management thinking with a big heart and vision for the world, and to combine those into one strategy so that you can accomplish your financial goals in ways that you're really excited about.
Okay, Jason, next question is this. Do you use mutual funds in addition to individual stocks?
Yeah, so we are a mutual fund company, and so really that's all we offer right now are mutual funds. We have 7 funds, and in each of those funds, for those of you that are not really familiar with a mutual fund is just a packaged portfolio of companies. So some of the examples I shared with you are in some of our funds. So this is probably a question actually for your team. When you put together a client portfolio, what goes into that mix? Would anyone on the Veritas team like to?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. So when it comes to the biblically responsible portfolios that we've designed for our clients, we use a mix of Eventide funds and some other fund families that also kind of employ similar philosophies in the way that they manage money and their values-based investing. So in order to develop a totally diversified portfolio, we do use some additional fund companies, but the overall strategy and philosophy of the portfolio is pretty much the same throughout.
Great. Good question.
All right, Jason, next question is pertaining to methodology. How do you go about actually doing this screening?
Yeah, good question. So our approach is to try to start out big picture and identify what we call themes, where I shared 3 themes with you. So water technology, unmet needs in healthcare, specifically in the central nervous system, and then clean energy. So as a firm, what we do is we try to think big picture. What are the themes that are meeting important needs in the world today? And then where can we invest in those themes in a profitable way within mostly the public markets? So rather than starting with negatives and saying like, we don't want to invest in tobacco or gambling stocks or these kinds of things on the negative side. We do have measures in place to ensure we don't invest in those things, but we're not trying to kind of establish a minimum requirement. We're actually trying to think big picture and use our imagination and say business is about meeting needs. So what are the needs that exist in the world today, and where can we invest to meet those needs? So it starts actually with those themes. And then within those themes, we zoom in and try to find the best companies. And we do this, we have an approach called Business 360, where we look at how a business is engaging with its various stakeholders. So those would be customers, employees, suppliers, communities, the environment, and then broader society. And then of course we layer on all of the traditional tools of finance. We build models, we do valuation analysis and all those sorts of things. So just to recap, big picture themes, zoom in to find the best companies, and then use the traditional tools of finance there.
All right, next question. I agree water is a key issue, but I also feel food comes into play as well. I'm concerned that our big farms are being bought by foreign companies. Consequently, we're losing control of our food production. What's your take on this?
Yeah, man, good question. So this is something I personally care about in my own life. One of my friends is a pasture-based farmer just outside of town here, where my Thanksgiving turkey came from him. So I sympathize with your concerns here. We're actually kind of actively looking at the sustainable agriculture space within the world of investing. We've made a few investments in this area, but to be honest with you, in the publicly traded markets, the opportunities that we've encountered so far have not been very compelling. I'm hoping that this can change. So I agree with you. I share your concern, and this is something that we hope we'll see change. So one of the encouraging things I would say here is that there does seem to be a growing awareness and concern about how our food is being produced. I think this is what's powering, for example, the farm to table restaurant movement, things like Whole Foods. And so I do think that growing awareness will cause increased transparency about how our food is produced, and hopefully it will bring a lot of innovation through businesses. So we're very interested to see this space develop, and I hope that many companies will begin to jump in with creative solutions.
Great. All right, this next question is for our Veritas team. Would current investments be sold in order to fund a new direction?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. If you're in a portfolio right now that is not in the BRI portfolio, it's a relatively easy switch to make. You know, in some cases we might have to use a different custodian, which would mean opening a new account and then moving funds or securities or assets over into that new account. At which point, yes, those assets would need to be sold, and then we'd purchase the new portfolio.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. All right, next question and comment. Thanks, Jason, for a great overview of Eventide's philosophy. Given that your portfolio often invests in medically related companies, how much of your decision to invest is based on expert scientific and medical knowledge? I was happy to hear you use the phrase mechanism of action, and to know that several of you at Eventide have medical and science backgrounds. But do you also engage consultations with those within biopharma? And does it matter if your consultants also hold to Christian values?
Really excellent question here. So yeah, I for one, don't have this background, and I'm really the storyteller on behalf of the company and the philosophy. But fortunately, we do have a lot of people with that background. So just to give you a little rundown of our healthcare portfolio managers and analysts. So our chief investment officer, the person I showed the picture from Uganda, he has an MD PhD from Harvard Medical. And so he got a PhD in chemical biology and his MD from Harvard Medical School there. We have another MD PhD from Harvard. We've got a person who comes from the biotech industry, where he has a PhD in drug design and has worked for companies like Novartis in actually designing and running trials. We've got a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard. And so, yeah, we actually have to bring a lot of expertise. It's the world of healthcare and life sciences is something today that those that are sort of generalists in investing, I think, have a difficult time understanding. You really have to understand the science behind the therapy to know whether or not it has the likelihood of success, and to understand all of the ins and outs there. So yeah, this is something that we have invested in pretty heavily in terms of our own expertise. And then yes, we do use consultations. So we are big believers in accessing the knowledge of others. And so we use what are called key opinion leader networks, where these are basically ways that we can be in touch with expert physicians, industry experts, industry observers, people working within these companies to basically access their knowledge and to then combine it and integrate it into our own. So yeah, this is something that you really have to have that deep domain expertise to do well. And this is something we've really been investing in. So excellent question there.
All right, next question is pertaining to how do I decide which of my values I want to see reflected in my investment choices?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We put together a tool which I believe the Veritas team has access to, where it's just the simple values inventory. You know, usually when you hear about some of these ideas for the first time, your mind is a little bit overwhelmed. You might think about the negatives, for example, and say, well, what kind of problems might I come into in investing? So there's a way that you can sort of assess that. And then there's a positive side to it as well. And it helps walk you through some of the questions there. So that's a tool that you could take advantage of just as a conversation guide to get the conversation going. So reach out to the guys here if you're interested in getting into some of the details there.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
I've got one last question, Jason.
Sure.
And that is, I know that this is very difficult to quantify, but I'm very curious at it. What percentage of the American investing population do you think has pursued or is engaged in this value-based, socially responsible, or biblically responsible investing industry right now? And I'll just preface that Veritas engaged in this about 3 or 4 years ago, and Eventide is one of our absolute top partner firms in this process. We love working with them. But every time we tell the story to any of our clients, it's like they really haven't heard the story. Yeah. So, but we live in a tiny little microcosm world, and I'm curious in a broader brush,
yep,
what your answer to that might be.
Yeah, so the numbers here are really hard to peg down. And I think that the research that you read overstates it a bit. Well, actually, by quite a bit. The latest numbers on this are something in the neighborhood of 1 out of every $4 is invested in some kind of a socially responsible investing vehicle. Now that of course could be some of the most minimal strategies to something that's really, fully integrated into trying to bring values and investing together. But 1 in $4, so 25% of the investing world is said to be here. If you're talking specifically about Christian-oriented investing, that number is much smaller. Just as an apples to apples, we actually crunched the numbers on this. So I said 1 out of $4 is SRI. It's actually 3 pennies out of $4 that would be coming from Christian-oriented perspective, from a Christian value set. So that number is really tiny. And yeah, a lot of people have never really thought about this. And so I think this is actually an opportunity for Veritas to introduce the subject to people. I think one of the things that does connect is the fact that most people really have no idea what they're investing in, right? We've outsourced that part of our life to the experts, and we just don't really know what's happening there. And so that lack of knowledge, I think drives our curiosity and our interest to learn more. And so obviously we would sleep better at night knowing that even though we're outsourcing that to somebody else, they share our values and are incorporating those values as well as the investing returns.
All right. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight and sitting in on our presentation. Jason, I particularly want to give you kudos to a job well done and a terrific overview of this topic. Any of you out there that have listened tonight that want to pursue further conversations with us and talk about this, you'll find us open to do that. We're excited about it, not only offering our more traditional type portfolios, but this we think is going to be a very explosive end of our business. So we're pretty fired up about it, and we will probably be doing some more follow-up events like this as well. But thank you all for attending. You'll probably see some of this if you want to hear it again on our website in the near future, so you can hear it again. And I wish you all a great evening and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all.